Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US politics update. I would say breaking news, everyone already knows about this. I've been waiting to do this all morning. It's now the afternoon, I'm very behind the times, and this is so freaking important. I have been warning you. I've been sounding the warning signs since before the election in November 2024, the US election, presidential election. I feel somewhat vindicated because pretty much everything I was shouting about is coming true, except it's even worse and quicker than I thought it would be. And I would love to just sit down and have a chat with one of my viewers or anyone out there who is fundamentally still who really does believe that Trump's the right guy for whatever area of politics you're talking about, the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, whether he really is a peacemaker, whether he's the right guy for the economy, for international diplomacy, for social cohesion in the United States, for freedom of speech. That's a good one. Freedom of speech, for the ability for the press to act with the freedom it needs in order for a democracy to function effectively. What has happened in the last 24 hours is exactly in line with what I've been reporting just for the last few days concerning the lawsuit on the New York Times, and what's happened with CBS and ABC previously, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press. We'll talk about all of this. I mean, let's just get my advertisers out of the way first. So this video, thank you so much to the advertisers. I'm going to give them now the platform. This video is sponsored, first of all, by JD Vance.
Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Okay, my next sponsor is Donald Trump, and thank you for Donald for these very cleverly chosen words.
And I banned all government censorship and restored free speech in America. We have free speech. We didn't have free speech.
Free speech. But let's not have him finish there. What else does Donald have to say?
After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America.
Brilliant. That's good. That's good. It's good, that.
Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents. Something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. And we are going to bring law and order back to our cities.
Excellent. So law and order, but really free speech. So my third sponsor, and you'll be surprised to know this because I know I already really like JD Vance and Donald Trump. So, but I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk. Anyway, he's agreed to sponsor this video. So this is his statement on behalf of the video.
And have like a sense of humor, So, I mean, the sort of the left wanted to make comedy illegal, you know? Like, you can't make fun of anything. So
No.
it's like, comedy sucks. It's like, nothing's funny. You can't make fun of anything. It's like, legalize comedy. Yeah. Legalize comedy.
And we've shifted the entire culture.
I want whatever he's taking. So let's legalize comedy. I mean, you can't say anything anymore because the left just wants to shut it down. So let's just legalize comedy. Let's get freedom of speech back. Thank you, JD Vance, for coming over and lecturing us in Europe about what freedom of speech really looks like. Thank you, Donald Trump, for bringing it back to the US. You do not want government censorship. You've got to have freedom of speech. And do you remember the time when Joe Rogan predicted that if Harris Waltz, if that ticket got in, if those lefty Democrats got in, that their administration would clamp down more on free speech? Goodness, oh God, those were terrible times, weren't they? So it's really lucky that all the three I've just talked about, they're sounding like massive advocates of free speech, and that everything's right. Anyone can, certainly in the comedy world, say what they like, and we don't want to make comedy illegal anymore. So it's really good that that's all happening in the United States. So it turns out Jimmy Kimmel was cancelled. As a comedian, his show was cancelled indefinitely. That fits in line with Stephen Colbert being cancelled, New York Times being sued, Wall Street Journal being sued by the president, 60 Minutes and CBS being sued, Paramount being sued, and Disney again previously, with ABC being sued because George Stephanopoulos said something that was justifiable, and Trump sued them, but they didn't want to go through with the court case and wanted to keep on the good side of Trump, so they paid him $16 million. And then Paramount wanted to, you like this because we're going to return to this idea, Paramount wanted to merge with Skydance, and that needed to go through a guy called Brendan Carr, who's in charge of the FCC, that gives you the green light as to whether you can merger or not. And so Paramount wanted a merger, but then Trump took CBS, which is owned by Paramount, to court over them editing an interview, which is exactly what you do with every interview. It's a frivolous case, lawsuit never would have been won by Trump in court, but because they wanted a merger and they needed the green light from Brendan Carr, they paid Trump $15 million and then gave another $35 million of public service announcements in favor of Trump to Trump. And so this is the control of the press. And of course, remember the Associated Press, when they refused to change the name for their international audience of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And so they got shut out of the White House. Do you remember all these free speech examples? Anyway, Jimmy Kimmel's been indefinitely cancelled because, of course, it's only the left that does cancel culture, right? So ABC has pulled Jimmy Kimmel Live off the air indefinitely following comments he made in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. Trump's FCC chair, Brendan Carr, earlier appeared on MAGA propagandist Benny Johnson's show and threatened to revoke ABC and Disney's broadcast licenses if they didn't take action against Jimmy Kimmel. So this is what Brendan Carr said.
Of our local communities, but this sort of status quo is obviously not acceptable where we are.
It's pretty chilling. You have.
Oh no, that's not what he said. This is what Brendan Carr said. My apologies. Actually, I think I have that. Here was a proper one. This is what Brendan Carr said. That's pertinent.
There's actions that we can take on licensed broadcasters, and frankly, I think that it's really sort of past time that a lot of these licensed broadcasters themselves push back on Comcast and Disney and say, listen, we are going to preempt. We are not going to run Kimmel anymore until you straighten this out, because we licensed broadcaster, are running the possibility of fines or license revocation from the FCC if we continue to run content that ends up being a pattern of news distortion. So I think, again, Disney needs to see some change here, but the individual licensed stations that are taking their content, it's time for them to step up and say, this, garbage, to the extent that that's what comes down the pipe in the future, isn't something that we think serves the needs of our local communities. But this sort of status quo is obviously not acceptable where we are. There's actions.
So the guy that hands out the license says, I think Disney should revoke, should cancel these shows. I think because they don't want to get to a situation where the local affiliate licensors to these shows and stations pull back. What you don't want is them to start getting fines. Well, who's going to fine them? You are, Brendan Carr. So Brendan Carr says they should stop having these shows, because otherwise the affiliates will pull back the license because they're worried about getting fined, and we don't want them to get fines. Oh no, I'm the one that fines them, by the way, and I'm going to fine them if they do X, Y, and Z. So in other words, Disney needs to stop running Jimmy Kimmel's show. And then what happened when Brendan Carr said this? Well, first of all, actually, we heard, it was an affiliate, I think, that pulled the show before Disney did. So Nexstar, official ABC broadcast affiliate Nexstar, is removing Jimmy Kimmel from all 32 of their ABC stations until Disney answers for Kimmel's despicable attack on Charlie Kirk, says Benny Johnson, who you just saw interviewing Brendan Carr. Brendan Carr, because they're all having a love-in, says, I want to thank Nexstar for doing the right thing. In other words, he puts pressure on Nexstar and affiliates. Nexstar then followed through, and we'll come to why they followed through and what they want from Brendan Carr, because it looks rather like Paramount and Skydance. Anyway, Nexstar then cancel Jimmy Kimmel, and then Brendan Carr congratulates them for cancelling it. In other words, this has come from the FCC. Local broadcasters have an obligation to serve the public interest. While this may be an unprecedented decision, it's important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values. I hope that other broadcasters follow Nexstar's lead. So then ABC, Disney, effectively pulled Jimmy Kimmel off air indefinitely for his egregious Charlie Kirk comments. We're gonna hear these egregious comments in a second. And Mr. Kimmel faced some criticism for comments he made on Monday about the motives of the man who was accused of killing Charlie Kirk. So let's listen to the absolutely heinous things that Jimmy Kimmel ended up saying. And we're going to hear it from the Bulwark a lot first.
You can decide for yourself if this was a fireable offense. Here it goes.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between
Now, it's really important, because this is the key statement he just said, and we're going to go back and hear it again. But he said that the MAGA lot are trying as hard as they possibly can to make sure that he's not seen as one of them. He's not actually talking about who the killer was. He's talking about people's perceptions of the killer. And I talked about this on my channel plenty of times, that the left wants to paint the guy as Tyler Robinson as someone on the right, and the right wants to paint him as someone on the left. And they're trying as hard as they can to paint the killer as not one of them. Right? That is what Charlie Kirk is, that is what Jimmy Kimmel is saying here.
The gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
And the point that it got some criticism is factually true. I've criticised the flag of the half-mast because they didn't put it at half-mast for Melissa Hortman, for any other people that were murdered by right-wingers. And it seems to be cherry-picking their morality here. So he's correct on that. I mean, I gave criticism on that. So he's factually correct there.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. There's demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish.
All right. So, look.
Okay. That is literally, his show has been banned for that. It's been pulled for that. We'll talk about why ABC did that. But really, we need to look at these affiliates like Nexstar that hold the licenses, local licenses, and then we're going to go to Sinclair in a second as well. None of it was factually untrue as far as I am concerned. And remember, this guy's a comedian. Just in case you are unaware, in the UK last night, one of our terrestrial TV channels, Channel 4, one of the main TV channels in the UK, ran 3 hours of Trump documentaries, 1 hour documentary just absolutely lambasting Trump over his it's part of a series, a 3-part series, I think, over his entire administration this time round. And then you had 2 hours, and this is during the state visit of Trump in the UK, having dinner with the king, etc., etc. They ran 2 hours of exposing Trump's lies, 100 lies in a row, that they showed you his lie and then they debunked the lie. And it was just straight through one. They numbered it, just went one lie, blah, blah, blah. This is when it happened. This is a debunking. This is a sourcing. And Channel 4 just went through 2 hours of Trump lying and lying and lying, right? I don't see Trump getting cancelled. So if this is about Jimmy Kimmel being insensitive, I don't think he was hugely insensitive given what the rhetoric we have heard has been. Was he telling mistruths, and is it illegal to tell mistruths anyway? Well, Trump gets away with it, so it's obviously, not too much of a problem when your guy does it, but it's not a mistruth anyway. Like, Jimmy Kimmel didn't lie there.
If you read the text, he says that MAGA right is trying to portray the Charlie Kirk assassin as anyone other than coming from MAGA. Yeah. We now know that Tyler Robinson was not a griper, wasn't MAGA. Likely, according to these text chains, was compelled to commit this heinous crime because he's in a romantic relationship with someone who's transitioning and found Charlie Kirk's anti-trans rhetoric horrifying. It's awful. No one should defend it, and we should be honest about his apparent motivations. Kimmel got that wrong.
But that's kind of did he?
That's a good point. Look, there's a way to think about it where he's just saying, yeah, they're trying to deflect whatever blame could be put on them.
Yeah, this is not, look, and anybody who's been watching the channel knows that I've been very meticulous about this and do not broker any sympathy for people who are out there trying to be like, well, I don't know, maybe this is a false flag, and maybe it's the Jews, and maybe it is MAGA. It's like, it's pretty clear what this is. But like, this was 2 nights ago. This was Monday night, so the text hadn't come out yet. And what he is saying here is that the MAGA gang is desperately trying to characterize the kid as anything other than one of them. So anyway, so there's 2 things. One, it's a joke. It's in the construct of a joke. I want to get to later what Jimmy Kimmel gave a serious monologue about this. So I want to get to in a second, like where he was being straightforward. But so this is a joke. But kind of the joke is about how MAGA is out there being super desperate to, try to use this to their political advantage. And then he goes on to show a clip of Trump. And so like that was kind of what was happening. It's not kind of what happened. It was what was happening. And Will Summer was following this because we were trying to figure out how the MAGA movement was responding to this in real time. And it's factually true that people like Dick Fuentes, maybe not MAGA, but MAGA adjacent, were like, we denounce violence. He's not one of us. They were moving expeditiously to try to distance themselves from the possibility that this guy could have been bred in their, ideological corner. So it's not totally factually inaccurate. And I should have said
inaccurate
that at all. You mentioned that he did actually have a serious element to his model.
Okay, and we're now going to go on to the Pod Save America team for just a little bit of their analysis here.
Acceptable where we are.
It's pretty chilling. You have the chair of the FCC basically talking like a mobster. Also, apparently he also said in that interview, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And now we have ABC clearly choosing the easy way.
Yeah, we found the easy way.
That ABC seems to have folded so quickly and so immediately to go even beyond that, right? Like all these people out there being like, well, Jimmy Kimmel said that he was one of us when this was a left-wing shooter. Now, whatever the specific meaning of like one of us, or whatever the exact term he uses, could mean that like the images over the weekend were that he came from a Republican family, that he wasn't trans as some people had alleged. I don't know exactly what the meaning would be, but even if you take that as being inaccurate, we have
corrected.
We have a
Issue of
way.
correction.
He do you not think that he would have addressed this controversy, that he wouldn't be willing to talk about this on the show? He could have answered this with speech.
Yeah, this is such an abridgment of free speech. I mean, look, to read the full quote, Brendan Carr said, "This is a very..."
And just to remind you that Brian Kilmeade from Fox News advocated for the involuntary euthanizing, the murder of homeless people. And then came out the next day and apologised. And everyone's like, oh, that's all right. He literally advocated mass murder. He literally advocated mass murder live on television, Brian Kilmeade. I don't hear Brandon Carr saying diddly squat about that. Jimmy Kimmel has a pretty innocuous section that you would expect him, the sort of thing you'd expect him to say, because he's been saying that ad infinitum in terms of like his targets for his comedy will be MAGA and Trump. Trump publicly denigrates Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel publicly denigrates Trump, and they had this spat that's been going on for some time that's seeped into even his comparing of the Oscars awards and whatnot. You know, so Jimmy Kimmel is clearly being shut down by the FCC, and again, we're going to look into this in a second, but it entails so much hypocrisy that it blows my mind.
Very serious issue right now for Disney. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to take action on Kimmel, or there is going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. There are calls for Kimmel to be fired. I think you could certainly see a path forward for suspension over this. So clearly, Carr is using his power at the FCC to all but demand that Disney fire Kimmel.
I hadn't heard that last part. That was about how explicit about calling for suspension.
Shocking.
Jesus. And then within hours of this interview airing, we find out that a bunch of affiliates have. Would you have the timeline of this?
Yeah, so just before the ABC announcement, Nexstar, which is one of the largest owners of local TV stations in the United States, they said that they were preempting episodes of Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future. And love it, you'll be shocked to learn that Nexstar is attempting a merger with another media company called Tegna, subject to regulatory approval.
So we have all.
So Nexstar pulls Jimmy Kimmel after Brendan Carr has suggested that should be what happens, talking explicitly about affiliates. They pull it because they need permission from Brendan Carr to merger with, I think, Tegna or whoever it was. Rather like Paramount needing permission from Brendan Carr and Trump, therefore, to merge with Skydance, settling out of court with Trump so that they can do that. Nexstar, so that they can merge with another company, does what Brendan Carr has asked affiliates to do. Who knew? This is state-sponsored censorship.
All these different levels of pressure from the federal government. We have the license pressure, we have the regulatory pressure on the approval of a merger, which they've been using to great effect. That's how they threatened CBS and Paramount, and ultimately, as part of that, we saw Stephen Colbert's show canceled. And it's just, it is obviously wrong for the federal government to put this kind of pressure on a company for speech it doesn't like, even if you view the speech, even if the speech is inaccurate. Right? The First Amendment doesn't go out the window because someone said something inaccurate. You can ask them to correct it. You can criticize them. You can tell people why it's wrong. You could, I suppose, someone could sue because you have to prove they did it on purpose, the actual malice. But the First Amendment doesn't go out the window.
Yeah. Also, like, again, we talked about this on the show, but the ABC settled with the White House and paid $16 million for these comments made by George Stephanopoulos that were entirely defensible in court. It bought them nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was looking at some tweets from the White House. Taylor Budwich, the deputy White House chief of staff, tweeted, "Welcome to consequence culture." Normal, common sense Americans are no longer taking the bullshit, and companies like ABC are finally willing to do the right thing and reasonable thing, make America great again. The Trump War Room account tweeted, "Hey ABC, when are you going to pull Matt Gutman ABC? You know, the reporter who was touched by the text messages that Charlie Kirk's assassin sent his lover?" Like, these guys got a taste of cancel culture and they want more.
And they like
more.
it.
Yeah.
And you know, I see also, like, by the way, I think there is a divide playing out in real time, though I think a lot of people will start learning how to sing from the songbook. But there are people that are instantly who see themselves as pro First Amendment, being like, whoa, 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 like Kimmel could have apologized. This seems to be going too far. This is a First Amendment issue. But I see just as many people saying, well, you know, these are the consequences, or, you know, ABC hates, ABC has been hating on the right for so long, or this isn't a free speech. It's a, you know, he clearly said something inaccurate. And it's actually not that far from like the attempts to use like a mortgage document to try to get somebody fired from a federal job, right? You like comb through the records to try to find a mistake and then use that as a justification. Like, so Donald Trump, no friend of accuracy, can say whatever he wants. Republicans can say whatever because they're friends of the regime, right? But liberals, you better be on your best behavior, because if you're somebody that is already disfavored, one false step, and all of a sudden you'll have the FCC breathing down your neck. One mistake, one error, you go too far, you fall for something you saw online, and then you'll have lost your ability to. We'll come after your corporate owners. We'll make your life miserable. We'll make you pay.
And like, of course,
absolutely 100% on the point there. This is Brendan Carr speaking
President
after
Trump
this
ran directly
to Fox News, saying there is more to come.
Look, President Trump ran directly at these legacy broadcast outlets, and he exposed them to these market forces. And a lot of these affiliate groups said, to your point, we're tired of carrying this stuff. Late night.
No, you put the threat there first, then the affiliate groups complied to your threat because arguably they wanted you to give them permission to merge. Don't then suddenly put this on affiliate groups when you were the one that stoked this.
It shows something's gone seriously awry there. They went from going for applause, from laugh lines to applause lines. They went from being court jesters that would make fun of everybody in power to being court clerics and enforcing a very narrow political ideology. And Nexstar, as you noted, stood up and said, look, we have the license and we don't want to run this anymore. We don't think it serves the interests of our community. Sinclair did the same thing. So there's more work to go, but I'm very glad to see that American broadcasters are standing up to serve the interests of their community. We don't just have this progressive foie gras coming out from New York and Hollywood.
You can complain about progressive foie gras, but that's their freedom of speech rights to say that. Like, anything else is a constraint of freedom of speech. I'm so sick and tired of hearing the right talk about how the left closes down free speech, and then we've seen 7 months of attacks on free speech after listening to these guys say that they despise the Europeans for not upholding freedom of speech. And but you know, we may not have the same opinions, but we will defend your right to those opinions and statements. And Donald Trump coming in at his inauguration saying, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship. And we've got Elon Musk saying we need to legalize comedy again because the left wants to make comedy illegal. And when you've got a comedian saying something that these people don't like, the FCC chair effectively gets the show pulled. It's just rank hypocrisy. Like, the cancel culture that has been concerned with Charlie Kirk's assassination has been insane on the right. And do you know what? Let's listen to JD Vance in the last couple of days. Because if you're thinking that Jimmy Kimmel was so freaking insensitive because someone has died and therefore you're not allowed to say X, Y, or Z, and that's good enough to get a show pulled, just listen to JD Vance the last couple of days.
So I was talking to I said Secretary of Defense, but our new Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. And I was talking to Secretary Hegseth, and you know what he said? He said, you know what, Mr. Vice President, we don't see any of these drug boats coming into our country. They've completely stopped. And I said, I know why. I would stop too. Hell, I wouldn't go fishing right now in that area of the world. But that is what a military that is dedicated to its purpose and a commander-in-chief that is dedicated to the national good can do.
Ha ha ha, I wouldn't go fishing in that part of the world now, as they've just murdered 14 Venezuelans in 2 boats without due process. So he can make jokes about the murdering of 14 people done by the US government. He can make jokes in front of a crowd of people about the death of 14 people. But Jimmy Kimmel makes a joke about the GOP or MAGA response to Kirk's death in trying to distance themselves from the shooter and make sure that they're not implicated at all because of the shooter's ideology, which is factually correct. And Jimmy Kimmel gets freaking cancelled. And then you get numbnuts like Scott Jennings on CNN, who is like Mr. MAGA these days, saying this.
And he's obviously free to say it.
Will you defend that speech in this country that will defend to the death the speech of others? Will you defend Jimmy Kimmel's speech?
Do I defend Jimmy Kimmel going on television and saying that a shooter from the left...
his right to do so?
He has a right to do so, but he does not have a right to have a television show where he lies his ass off to the American people.
Well, lies his ass off. You need to substantiate where he's lied his ass off in that very short segment. You saying he lies his ass off is you lying your ass off. How ironic.
Tax hack this country on a nightly basis.
Whoa. Hold on. Listen, there are plenty of people over on another network that I will not name who lied about the last election, who denigrate half the country every single night. And guess what? They are allowed to do it. Now, the question is,
Fox News.
Is the
By their
government...
company. It's their business decision.
Hold on. But is the government supposed to be punishing people for the speech that they don't like? Is that the role of the government in your mind?
The government is not punishing them. This was not a government decision. Ultimately, Disney made a decision. Ultimately, CBS made a decision earlier this year. You all are blaming the government. That's your opinion. That's your opinion.
It's your opinion that it was under the pressure of the administration when you just heard Brendan Carr's words. It's outrageous. And let's just linger on Brendan Carr for a second. This is what he said in 2019. Should the government censor speech it doesn't like? Of course not. The FCC, what he's in charge of now, but he wasn't at the time. The FCC does not have a roving mandate to police speech in the name of the public interest. He has literally 100% acted against what he was saying in 2019. Here is Brendan Carr again. So this is what he said yesterday. I want to thank Nexstar for doing the right thing. Local broadcasters have an obligation to serve the public interest. While this may be an unprecedented decision, it is important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values. I hope that other broadcasters follow Nexstar's lead. President Biden is right, he said back in 2022. Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humour to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship. It's just insane. Now, Brian Stelter from CNN, he said, I asked FCC Chair Brendan Carr if he had any comment now that ABC has pulled Jimmy Kimmel's show, and he sent me this GIF. So he sent a GIF from the office of the two office actors celebrating effectively. So if you don't think this decision is coming from the FCC itself, from Brendan Carr himself, then you don't get what's going on. Brendan Carr wrote the new textbook definition of jawboning when he said of Kimmel and ABC, we can do this easy way or the hard way. And he celebrates his censorship with a lame meme, which in the same world would be an exhibit in a lawsuit. So you could take Brendan Carr to court now, and the lawsuit, yeah, depending on what you're taking to court for. I mean, this would be an exhibit there, which is like, so if you were saying, were you pressuring these affiliates to do what you wanted? First of all, was this what you wanted? Well, here's what you said. Here's what you said. Here's what you said back in 2019. Here's what you said back in 2022. And after this decision, here is what you said. You are celebrating what these entities did after you had asked those entities to do what you wanted them to do. Right. We heard about Nexstar preemptively pulling the show. Sinclair, which is, if you don't know Sinclair, we're going to talk about them in a second. They are a very Republican local TV conglomerate, or like just almost a monopoly. They own an absolute ton of local TV stations, which you might think are CBS, Fox, ABC, whatever, but actually it's Sinclair that runs them. And they script the news shows, and they are GOP. They donate to the GOP. They're big donors to the Republicans, and they are super MAGA, basically, Sinclair as an organization. So unsurprisingly, Sinclair said it will air a 1-hour tribute to Charlie Kirk on its ABC affiliate stations in the time slot that it usually occupied for Jimmy Kimmel Live. The special will air on Friday per a Sinclair spokesperson. And you can go and see that statement there. In fact, what they've asked is that Jimmy Kimmel also pays tribute. They're going to run a Kirk tribute, and they actually want Jimmy Kimmel, and you could say pay a tribute, to pay a donation to Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's organization. So they're calling on Jimmy Kimmel to donate to Turning Point USA whilst pulling the Jimmy Kimmel show and then running a tribute to Charlie Kirk. So just to remind you who Sinclair are, I've played you this before. I really advise you go and watch John Oliver from 8 years ago run a whole thing on Sinclair Broadcast Group that was an absolutely must-watch piece of Last Week Tonight, where he takes Sinclair to town and shows them for who they are. This is who Sinclair are. This is from 7 years ago.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So you have, rather lacking in free speech, a scripted approach to a pro-Republican message that is spread routinely on these local TV channels that you think are ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC. So you think that they would align themselves to those networks, but they're actually run by Sinclair. And Sinclair provide these scripts that are deeply, deeply pro-Republican and have been deeply pro-Trump and anti-Democrat. And that's what John Oliver looked at. So you've got Sinclair, unsurprisingly, pulling Jimmy Kimmel and loving it. That's exactly what they want to do. You've got Nexstar doing it as well. Now, this is what Jake Tapper says of what Nexstar did that's worthy of note.
Charlie Kirk's assassin was not one of theirs so that they could score political points. That's what he said. Well, follow the money. In August, Nexstar, the largest owner of TV stations, local TV stations in the country, announced that they wanted to purchase their rival Tegna for more than $6 billion. Now, in order for that deal to go through, Nexstar would need the approval of the Federal Communications Commission. And in fact, they would need the FCC to lift the cap, a 39% cap that the FCC has, which is a rule that states no company can own enough TV stations to reach more than 39% of the households in the United States. And this deal going through would violate that cap. The current chair of the FCC, Brendan Carr, he earlier this year said that he would be willing to entertain lifting what he called arcane artificial limits on how many TV stations any one company can own. Okay, so that's where we are. Nexstar wanting to get the FCC's approval, the FCC commissioner making it clear that his mind is open. Today, Wednesday, the FCC commissioner goes on a podcast, a MAGA podcaster, and makes it very clear that he did not like the comments that Jimmy Kimmel made on Monday night. He calls Kimmel talentless. And then he says...
So I think, again, Disney needs to see some change here, but the individual licensed stations that are taking their content, it's time for them to step up and say, this, garbage, to the extent that that's what comes down the pipe in the future, isn't something that we think serves the needs of our local communities. But this sort of status quo is obviously not acceptable where we are.
You believe that? So he's calling on local TV stations to reject the Jimmy Kimmel show. That was posted on Twitter or X at 1:01 p.m. Wednesday. Within hours, Nexstar makes the announcement that the company's owned and partnered television stations affiliated with ABC will preempt Jimmy Kimmel because they object to recent comments made by Kimmel. And then, shortly after that, ABC television network announced that they were suspending Kimmel's show. And so, while there are no doubt people who are legitimately offended by what Kimmel said, and no doubt tensions are high and feelings are fraught, there is also a lot of money to be made. And there are also a lot of people who want to endear themselves to the FCC commissioner and President Trump.
Nothing to disagree with there, but it gets worse. So then Trump says this last night. Great news for America. The ratings challenged Jimmy Kimmel show is cancelled, so he gets what he wants. The FCC has operated on his behalf. He continues, congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. So Colbert's lost his show as well. So he's taken 2 out of the big 4 down. Who are the other 2? Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers. So he then continues, that leaves Jimmy and Seth, 2 total losers on fake news NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC, President DJT. So now he's calling on NBC to cancel Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers. I love Seth Meyers. I think his show is absolutely brilliant, by the way. This is state-sponsored censorship. Gary Kasparov said time again to remind you that an early sign of Putin's autocratic ambitions was the cancellation of a puppet show that regularly parodied him. This is what dictatorships do. This is how they operate. Let me remind you of Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny, and he knows a fair few things about tyranny concerning the history of Russia and Ukraine. His lesson number one in the book was do not obey in advance. So have a look at what ABC and Disney have just done. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. This is essentially, although they were asked, but just politely asked to sort this out or taken to court, but baying in advance, saying like either in advance without being asked or with the slightest bit of pushing, they just capitulate and they offer themselves up. That's what the podcast, the Pod Save America team was talking about, how ABC just completely capitulated immediately over Jimmy Kimmel. This is a very quick march towards authoritarianism. Now, Matthew Gertz here saying hosts of Newsmax and Fox News are still claiming the alleged shooter of the Minnesota legislators was a leftist. So this is Vance Bolter, who is openly a Christian nationalist, pro-Trump Republican who killed Melissa Hortman. Now, if we're talking about Jimmy Kimmel supposedly lying his ass off, as Scott Jennings said, you've got Fox News and Newsmax claiming that Vance Bolter they're still claiming he's a leftist. They're trying to make the case that all political violence is on the left to justify its repression. So they can get away with lying their ass off. Scott Jennings, he's pretty quiet on that. And yet Jimmy Fallon is making a joke where he doesn't lie his ass off and he gets cancelled for supposedly lying his ass off. And isn't it a funny day when Tucker Carlson is beating the drum for freedom of speech advocacy, and I'm agreeing with him?
You hope that. You hope that Charlie Kirk's death won't be used by a group we now call bad actors to create a society that was the opposite of the one he worked to build. You hope that. You hope that a year from now, the turmoil we're seeing in the aftermath of his murder won't be leveraged to bring hate speech laws to this.
A year from now? Like right now, Pam Bondi has just been talking about creating hate speech laws that would look to do exactly this. And that's actually what he's referring to. This isn't in reaction to Jimmy Kimmel, by the way. This is reaction to Pam Bondi and hate speech regulation and essentially an assault on freedom of speech from the Department of Justice, which is, as Tucker Carlson rightly says, exactly the opposite of what Charlie Kirk himself proclaimed. He said there's no such thing as hate speech. In fact, you should have the freedom to say basically what you like.
Won't be leveraged to bring hate speech laws to this country. And trust me, if that does happen, there is never a more justified moment for civil disobedience than that, ever. And there never will be. Because if they can tell you what to say, they're telling you what to think. There is nothing they can't do to you because they don't consider you human. They don't believe you have a soul. A human being with a soul, a free man, has a right to say what he believes. Not to hurt other people, but to express his views. You hope that.
So what you might start seeing on the right, possibly, are some of these actual free speech advocates coming out and saying, whoa, this is a step too far. And we heard that from the analysis earlier. Now, the Rolling Stone has come out and given an explanation as to what happened with ABC and Disney. Rolling Stone is now confirming what we all knew happened with Jimmy Kimmel's show. According to their reporting, executives at ABC and Disney didn't think Kimmel said anything outrageous, but they feared retaliation from Trump, obeying in advance. This is a blatant attack on free speech. So they pulled it, afraid of what Trump might do at a later point. Rolling Stone. In the hours leading up to the decision to pull Jimmy Kimmel, two sources familiar with the matter say senior executives at ABC, its owner Disney, and affiliates convened emergency meetings to figure out how to minimize the damage. Multiple execs felt that Kimmel had not actually said anything over the line, the two sources say, but the threat of the Trump administration retaliation loomed. Obey in advance. So Governor Gavin Newsom now, or his press office, recognising that there's this double standards going on because you had Brian Kilmeade advocating for the murdering of homeless people. Last Wednesday, a Fox News host says homeless people should be executed. On Monday, Jimmy Kimmel makes a joke. Guess which one lost their job? Mehdi Hassan says, silly Jimmy Kimmel. He should have just called for all homeless people to be killed and he'd still have a job. Now, the New York Times has come out. The CEO has warned that Donald Trump is deploying the anti-press playbook. So we've been waiting to see what the New York Times is really going to do about being taken to court by Trump, which is all part of this same problem. An assault on the freedom of speech, an assault on the First Amendment, an assault on the free press. The Financial Times reports the chief executive of the New York Times has said the company will, quote, not be cowed by Donald Trump's $15 billion lawsuit against the newspaper and accuse the US president of enacting an anti-press playbook. Meredith Kopit Levien described the lawsuit not only as legally baseless, but as part of a campaign to intimidate independent journalism, drawing parallels with authoritarian tactics in countries such as Turkey and Hungary. This is what they did. I said to you the other day, he's doing the Victor Orban playbook. This is what they did in Hungary. This is what they're doing now, except they're doing it a damn sight quicker. 7 months and we're in what, 1936? Germany? Quote, there is an anti-press playbook at this point. If you look at countries like Turkey and Hungary and India, those countries have elections, but they also really work to quash opposition to the regime, Levien said at a Financial Times conference. What has that anti-press playbook looked like in those places? It's harassment of journalists, it's discrediting of independent journalism, and it looks like what we're seeing here. The New York Times will not be cowed by this, Levien said in her first public comments since the lawsuit was filed. And at the same time, Donald Trump announces, I'm pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa, all caps, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So an anti-fascist organization is now being designated as a terrorist organization. And that is the US administration starting to outlaw political opposition. Meanwhile, a big golden statue to Donald Trump and Bitcoin has been erected outside the White House. Not by Donald Trump, I must add. But there you go. Because nothing says dictatorship like fawning statues of Trump and his golden awesomeness. A new lawsuit is giving us an inside look at the Trump loyalty test at the FBI. So I'm just going to add another couple of bits into this because this is all part of the same playbook. And if you weren't worried already, this should worry the crap out of you because these are loyalty tests to Trump at the heart of the FBI. And if you don't pass the test, the loyalty test to Trump, then you don't get to work for the FBI. It then becomes a de facto internal security services for your dictator.
I think this is the first time we've actually had the entire text of the loyalty test. I want to read this from your reporting and from the lawsuit. These were the questions asked of Officer, well, I guess Acting Director Brian Driscoll. Question 3, who did you vote for? Response 3. Driscoll refused to answer this question and stated that it was an inappropriate question with Hatch Act implications. Question 4. Do you agree that the FBI agents who stormed Mar-a-Lago, to include the rank and file, should be held accountable? Response 4. No. FBI personnel were doing their job in furtherance of court orders, legal warrants, and a properly predicated investigation. Question 5. What are your thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Response 5. Driscoll mentions that members of his own family were first-generation citizens and that he strongly believes in diversity and a diverse workforce that represents the people the FBI serves. He noted that he does not believe in promoting people for the sole reason of diversity and did not support diluting standards for the sake of diversity alone. Question 6, when did you start supporting President Trump? Response 6, Driscoll refuses to answer this question. Question 7, have you voted for a Democrat in the last 5 elections? Response 7, Driscoll refused to answer this question. After the final question, the loyalty test interview ends. I don't know that I don't know, what is it, 10 years of covering the Trump story. I don't know that that's ever been revealed as the actual ambition of a loyalty test atop the FBI. It's stunning to read.
I agree. And it was surprising to learn that Driscoll, the acting director, was asked for his voting history because the whole point, Nicole, as you know, and as now many of your viewers and our viewers know, the whole structure of the FBI and the directorship, a director is supposed to serve for 10 years. It was structured precisely to keep this premier law enforcement agency and its sort of amazing powers apolitical.
The press, opposition organisations, funders of political opposition, the FBI. They're all coming under the unified power of the executive. Ilhan Omar, who is a politician who has engendered an awful lot of hate from the Republican right, is responding here, and this is similar sorts of situation going on. So Nancy Mace, who is a Republican representative, said, we're finding a resolution to strip Ilhan Omar of her committee assignments after her disgraceful remarks on Charlie Kirk's assassination. So again, you are getting a freedom of speech cancel. You've got freedom of speech, attack on freedom of speech, and an absolute embracing of cancel culture by those on the Republican Party's right. Well, I'm not seeing pretty much any pushback from anyone in the Republican Party, so it seems that the entire party is complicit in this. Ilhan Omar says, fun fact, Nancy Mace is trying to censure me over comments I never said. Her res does not contain a single quote from me because she couldn't find any. Unlike her, I've routinely condemned political violence, no matter the political ideology. This is all an attempt to push a false story so she can fundraise and boost her run for governor. Getting censured, getting publicly cut down in one way or another, being silenced by the Republican Party. This is what David Frum has to say. I've just got 2 more snippets for you. This is David Frum speaking about sort of cancel culture.
There's only one thing that matters. There's only one thing that matters. We had a threat of retaliation by a government official for someone not pronouncing government-commanded speech. There was an order from the state about what people must say. Jimmy Kimmel did not say that, and his corporation was threatened with consequences by a government official. This is not cancel culture because it's not culture. It's state repression. It's an order from the government. Here's the script you must read. If you do not read it, you will be taken off the air. Jimmy Kimmel didn't read it. He was taken off the air. This cannot be, because he's a comedian, there'll be people who say maybe we shouldn't take this as seriously, but here's the comparison I would suggest. When Paul Pelosi was brutally attacked, many, unfortunately, including the son of the former President Trump, made light of it. A terrible thing, heartbreaking, a terrible attack on an 82-year-old man. Imagine if the Biden administration had given a script and said, this is what everybody must say about Paul Pelosi. And if you don't say it, we will bring pressure to bear on your parent corporation to fire you. Greg Gutfeld at Fox, you're not sad enough about Paul Pelosi. You're not saying what we command to be said about Paul Pelosi. Therefore, unless Fox fires you, we are going to bring regulatory havoc to bear on the parent corporation.
What an amazingly insightful analogy there. So that whole scenario with Paul Pelosi, who was attacked with a hammer, almost killed, and Republicans, including
there's only one thing that matters.
Donald Trump Jr. lambasted him. Like Donald Trump Jr. had memes about Halloween costumes of a pair of pants and a hammer. Just really deeply insensitive. Deeply insensitive. If I was Nancy Pelosi, I'd just take Donald Trump Jr. to court. Like, looking at all this is happening and the shutdown of free speech concerning Charlie Kirk is like, okay, right, let's really expose your double standards here. Horrific. This is Chris Murphy, the Connecticut senator.
Stephen Colbert is gone. Jimmy Kimmel is gone now. You need to see what is happening right now. It is the systematic destruction of free speech in this country. It is Donald Trump using the power of the White House, in this case, the power of his regulatory agencies, to try to shut down any speech that opposes him. Understands the gravity of this moment. This is a moment for the country to mobilize. This is a moment for all of us to be out on the streets protesting, because if you don't raise your voices right now about the assault on free speech, about Donald Trump's decision to disgustingly exploit the murder of Charlie Kirk so as to try to permanently render powerless and impotent those who politically oppose him, there may be no democracy to save a year from now. This is a red alert moment, man. It feels like the red alert has been on since January, but the days are getting darker, which means the obligation on us to stand up and mobilize is getting more urgent.
All I can see on the horizon is autocracy, authoritarianism, totalitarianism. It's what Trump wants. And it's what people around him are facilitating. They're not just facilitating, they're actively going out and making it happen. Whether it be Brendan Carr or JD Vance or Stephen Miller, whether it be Sinclair or Fox News, whether it be Elon Musk or any other number of people who are acting on behalf of the Trump administration, there is a growing autocracy in the United States, and that should scare the bejesus out of anyone in the US. I really do hope there is political mobilization on the back of all of these events, because it just can't happen. It can't continue to happen like it is at the moment.